Welcome back, guys. Great job making it so far in the course. There is one more topic that we need to cover, as I mentioned in my previous video, before we get into building your CV and starting to look into the job market. The topic that we're going to cover today is test planning. It's not going to be an activity that is going to be your direct responsibility in your early stages of career, but it's definitely something important to know because it helps you in a number of ways. One way that it will help you is it will enhance your understanding of the concepts that you have learned so far in the wider context, kind of like in the wider plan of action when it comes to ensuring the quality of different products and end-to-end testing in general. Another thing that it can come handy for is actually feeling or making a more confident impression during the interviews, because if you can understand these local concepts that you've learned in the wider context, it will actually make your answers more inclusive. So when someone asks you about testing types or when you would perform this activity or a bunch of other things which would relate to the skills that we have covered so far, even when it comes to defects and test preparation, if you see that it's actually part of a larger structured process, or it at least should be, then your answers will be more inclusive, as I mentioned. So you would be able to approach the question and that local skill from different aspects. And as I mentioned, this is not going to be your direct responsibility, but we will go through together over a standard test plan document, which is essentially a document which lists all of the steps and all of the necessary actions of an overall test planning exercise, let's put it that way. And we will explore each of the sections, understand why they're needed for, and how that document actually translates later to the actual test management process and the execution of the overall test plan during your projects. So stay tuned and let's look into it.
All right, so first thing to know, really short, is if you didn't guess already by the name itself, like a test plan is an activity, or a test plan document is a document which lists all of the items of testing, the scope of testing, the activities, and a bunch of other related things which need to be planned out before you start spending any time or effort on testing an application. And this is a document which will be maintained throughout the life cycle of your project. In some cases, companies either don't have a test plan, or they kind of, disregard it after some time, like they would put it together in the beginning and then they would forget about it. It's generally a good practice to always maintain a test plan because it keeps everyone, all of the stakeholders which are involved in the testing, kind of focused and not drifted away from the main targets of testing and the main approaches. But I will tell you why in certain cases companies and projects might get away with not even having a test plan, and I just share some of my experience with that as well, but we'll leave that to the end of the video. All right, so this test plan document that you see on the screen is a standard one. It's this IEEE test plan outline, which is like some standard, basically an international standard, which will help guide your efforts in terms of putting together a brand new test plan. I mean, as I mentioned, you don't have to be doing this, but this would be fairly standard. So if you know the concepts in this test plan template, you should be able to handle pretty much any other one as well. And what we'll do, I mean, you can see that in this template itself, there is a bunch of explanations for each of the sections. So we're not going to be reading out loud together. Obviously, it would be very redundant. So I will leave a link in the description of this video for you guys to read it at your free time. I would still recommend to read through this because, obviously it will give you much more detail and you can do it at your own pace. But what we will do is we will go through each of the sections real quick, and it will just kind of form a sense for you of where this starts, where this ends, what are the typical items that are included, and I will highlight certain things which are kind of very important. I mean, one would say that all of the items in the template would be important, but there are certainly some things which, regardless of if you are following a formal test planning process and if you're maintaining a formal test plan or not, you have to prioritize anyways, and they are included in here. Cool, so let's go from top to bottom. So a test plan identifier, as you can see in here, is basically just something to identify this document, like what kind of a document it is. Maybe just add some numbers to the test plan itself, to the products that are going to be included, just an ID basically. Don't have to care about it that much. References, like this would be, because a test plan is only, test planning and testing is only part of a bunch of different activities and planning processes throughout the project lifecycle. You might want to list out any references that you have to any other documents, like if you're kind of referring to overall project delivery plan section this and this, when you want to describe something else in your test plan document. Again, not super critical, but worth knowing. Introduction, same there. This is basically just to state what the target of this test plan is, what you want to achieve with this test plan, what will be the key activities in it, etc., etc. And like maybe you can also again link here kind of the specific project plan that you want to be referring to, and that this plan is basically covering, etc. Again, not super critical for you to know at this point. This is just some, you could call it like metadata to help kind of maintain the document and keep track of it. Now this is where things start to get interesting. Test items. So in here you would, this is the very first level where you would outline what the overall application that you're testing is. Like on a high level, what are the items that you're testing with this test plan? It could be that the test plan covers even a bunch of different, or like more than one application, or more than one function of an application. I mean, ideally you would want to cover one test plan per one piece of software under test, but it could be also situations where you're testing like an integration of multiple systems, and then you might list them in here on a high level. Again, not super critical, but this is starting to get closer to the scope of it. Yeah. Software risk issues, as you can see outlined in here. So, and as the word suggests, these are basically some things which can risk either the delivery of the software or can risk the testing of the software itself. Like you can list in here areas, as it's mentioned in here, which could be of like more prone to certain issues, and they are critical in terms of the business priorities as well, and you kind of need to highlight them in here. So you can see in here that, for example, you're expecting a delivery of a third-party product. Like if you are building a component and you need to integrate with something like another piece of software to make it work, and that piece of software is provided by another company, this could potentially cause a risk, like if they're delayed, etc. It's like out of your control, etc. So basically some risk to outline in here, and you can read through in more detail. Features to be tested and features not to be tested is quite important, and this is kind of the meat, like we were starting with the meat of it all. So you basically need to outline, because there will be things that, for example, are out of scope for you to test, and they will be, for example, tested by someone else, yeah, or they will not be included in this particular release. So in here you want to list the features that you will be testing and the features that you will skip. And the way to do this, one way to do this would be, for example, to list the epics that you will be testing, yeah, and on a high level. It depends, like you might want to get more granular, or someone creating the test plan might want to get more granular to specify a more kind of a detailed level. But overall, as the word suggests, you will drop here things that you're planning to test as part of this test plan, and things that you're not planning to test based on a bunch of reasons, like you can see in here, kind of like something is low risk and has been used before, and that's why you don't want to spend time on it, etc. The testing approach and or the strategy. Sometimes, by the way, this might turn into a separate document, so you might have like a test strategy document, and don't get confused when you hear these words like a test strategy and a test plan. A test strategy would be your overall approach to testing, and a test plan might then kind of be a branch out of that, specifically related to like a fixed version or an iteration of a product, etc. But as such, the strategy is basically how you're going to be approaching the execution of this test plan. Yeah, like you need to agree, as you can see in here, also like the overall strategy with different stakeholders, that like the final outcomes of your approach will be accepted, etc. And you can see there's like a bunch of good questions to ask when it comes to trying to figure out what your strategy should be. So like, you know, are we going to be using any special tools? It could be like you're testing something which is not necessarily only software related, but it could be also like a hardware, and you need a special prototype to be built if you're able to test. Yeah, like if you're in the automotive industry and you're building like a new component, and it needs to be also tested on hardware, then you know, you have to specify that part of the strategy would be to make sure that all of the tests are also verified on the hardware itself. Or will you need some special training, or what kind of metrics will be collected, like your defect density, like your testing pass rate, etc. Just overall kind of points which I guess are just generally applicable to any iterations even afterwards, and you might adjust them later on. So as the word suggests, this is your overall strategy of testing. This is quite key in here. So the item pass and fail criteria is for you to specify when exactly you're going to consider this test plan to be complete after its execution. So at each level you might want to specify, as it states in here. So like says in here, for example, at the unit test level, this could be something like all test cases have completed, a specified percentage of test cases completed with a percentage containing some number of minor defects, etc. And yeah, like on a wider level, you would say that all lower level plans completed. As I mentioned, like you could have like a wider strategy and then have some kind of adjacent plans for each of iterations or each of different components, doesn't matter, but essentially you just specify in here when are you going to consider the work done and when are you going to consider the work not done, like and the testing plan having failed, which will then result in like a no-go decision for the software. Yeah. Suspension criteria and resumption requirements. This would be something to put in here to specify when it makes no more sense to continue the testing. Yeah, so it could be a situation where you end up having so many dependencies or so many, like the quality of the software that you're trying to test is so low that you're meeting critical or blocker defects on every step, so it doesn't even pass your smoke testing criteria, and you would basically, you know, suspend your testing. And then now when would you resume the testing as such, and you could specify these criteria in here. Deliverables, so this would be what would be the output of the test team. Yeah, so what would be the output of your team? So test plan document would be one of the outputs. Test cases written up and documented, as we covered in the previous videos, would be another one. Test design specifications, if that's applicable. What kind of tools and what kind of reports or outputs produced by them would have to be delivered by. So if you have like a reporting tool, and there is certain kind of outputs that are required by it to be provided, like what you would specify in here. A bunch of other things, yeah, in here. So it could be, again, all of this can be differing from project to project, but also this one, you might agree. I would say typically like at least a test plan document would be by default expected. And again, we'll cover why in some cases people or projects skip this. And in other cases, most of the time, you would also need to include test cases and test design specs as well. And these would kind of come as granted. So like error logs and execution logs would be something that you would always be linking to the defects, and says problem reports in here. So like it's given that if you're testing, you're going to be raising bugs. So depends. I mean, you might want to specify it as an output, or you might want to leave it like as a general kind of note saying obviously all of the results of the execution in form of bugs, error logs, screenshots, videos, etc., or evidences of testing performed will be added in here. Yeah. Remaining test tasks. So this is basically something that you're going to be writing in here in case the application is going to be released and there will be parts of the application that you haven't tested yet for whatever reasons. For example, there will be some things that you have put in here in features not tested, and you want to carry some of them to the next release to be tested. Yeah, so you'll just specify some of them there if they are known at the time. Again, like I haven't met this kind of field a lot in the test plans that I have put, because you obviously, like, if you put it in the features not tested, then you decide in the next release what you want to pick up and test and what not. But again, a field there to introduce a bit more granularity. Environmental needs or test environments. Now this is very important because I don't think we've covered this, but in a dedicated video, and maybe it would be a good idea for later on to kind of do a separate instructional video on this one. But essentially, test environments are something that you're going to be using to test your software application before it is live or before it is in production. So you need, like, you want to have a www.facebook.com built and used by the wider audience eventually, but before getting there you obviously need to test all of the separate features before making it available. So you would create a test instance of that. So it would be called, for example, www.test.facebook or test-facebook.com or test1.facebook.com or test2.facebook.com. and then you might also, well, normally the standard structure would be to have at least one test environment per one kind of test purpose. So you would have, for example, your system testing being performed on one test environment, so like system test.facebook.com, and your user acceptance testing being on a separate test environment, so like uat-facebook.com, and your regression testing being done on a separate environment, so like regression.facebook.com, etc. And this is where you will specify those needs. So this will be specifically done by your test manager. I don't think you would have to be involved in planning this per se, but your input will be definitely appreciated after some time, once you have gained some experience and you know kind of that, we will need one more environment, for example, to handle this or that. Staffing and training needs. So basically a test manager would normally try to understand, based on the scope of testing, how big the testing is going, how much of effort the testing is going to require, and like if how many people there will be needed, and what kind of trainings they will need to be before they're able to execute. I mean, normally if you join if you join a purely software company and it's like it's a mobile application or something, you should pretty much have all of the skills already. Like, they would already check to make sure that you're coming with all of the necessary skills. But it could be situations where, like, a new component is being introduced, or an integration with a new complex tool is being introduced, and you can't really test it until you really know what that tool is. So you might need training before you're able to proceed. Yeah, if this is like, for example, you're already employed for 1 year and you're about to go and start testing a new iteration or a new product. So this would outline that. And then responsibilities, this would be like to define clearly who's doing what as part of the test team. So like the test manager does certain things, and someone identifies the risks and manages them, and someone executes the test cases, etc. So you drop them here. And normally you would also link this with kind of the names of the people. So this would be kind of like, you could call this kind of like people and responsibilities, or team members and responsibilities, or just team members, and then just highlight what each person's position is, and with what kind of problems they should be the main point of contact. The testing schedule is quite important in here as well. So you would be dropping in here things related to the overall timeline of your testing. So when which activity is going to start. Yeah. So if you're basically working in an agile environment, like you're running Scrum, normally your test iterations will be part of like kind of your component level testing and system testing. In part will be part of the Scrum activities, so like will be part of every sprint, and they will be iterational. But still, you might want to highlight that in here, and then you might want to mention that you want to have like a final phase. In Agile, they would call it something like a hardening sprint, or your regression test phase towards the end of your project where you make sure that all of the necessary regression test activities are also performed, and you just want to highlight in here when that's approximately going to happen. And this will be a section which will be very tightly linked with the overall project plan when you're describing it. Planning risks and contingencies. So as the word suggests, as the title suggests, in here you would want to plan out anything that could risk the testing. So something that, I don't know, external or internal factors that could make the team not able to perform their work, like the test team to not be able to perform their work. It could be some things like, as you can see in here, lack of personnel resources when testing is to begin. Obviously, this would be the first step. Like if a test manager is putting this together and says we need 10 people to start the testing and there's no one there, then you can't test it. But that's pretty obvious. And it could be that you have some dependencies on tools or hardware which is not provided at time, etc. So you'd list them here. Approvals. So this is also a very important part. This would highlight people or stakeholders which require to kind of claim that the quality of the software that you have produced or you have maintained based on this test plan is meeting all of the key stakeholders requirements. So you will list the key stakeholders in here, and these will be essentially the people also that will eventually approve your test results. And that's pretty much it. So in here at the bottom, you also have some example for later on for you to explore. And you can see like, it's some type of application which you can read through, and you will just see the same exact sections. In this case, you had them with descriptions, and in here you will have them actually with examples from that specific application. So you can read through if that's interesting. I would still recommend to read it. And a few more notes, like these wordings in here are not necessarily the same all around. So you might end up in a company where, for example, they have a test plan, and instead of item pass-fail criteria, you would see entry and exit criteria. Or actually that's not interchangeable, but it could be just phrased differently, and I guess like you could interchange that in here. So when do we consider something ready for testing, and when do we consider something that has passed our testing? That would actually be your exit criteria, while in here you have a pass and a fail. So entry criteria would be something like like at least smoke testing has passed, at least certain things like the documentation on the new features having built has completed, obviously the features have been built, etc. What I mean is like the wording may differ, but the general structure should be similar. Yeah, and the key points in here is what are we testing? So test items, features to be tested, not to be tested, pass-fail criteria and entry-exit criteria, the environments, the test deliverables, the environmental needs, and the approvals would be very key, because this is going to be your defense when it comes to defending your efforts done and defending the quality of the software or actually presenting it to the stakeholders and making sure it's approved and has followed a certain structure. Now, as I mentioned, this test plan document or something similar to this in very structured and large organizations is very often required to be put together, simply because a bunch of things are standardized, and this would be part of the standardized documentation set to be produced by a test manager, maybe assisted with a tester during before the beginning of any project, and you will have to have it at all times. But from my experience, I have seen in many cases projects not having this, and the reason why they skip this is because over time, over the evolution of the processes, specifically also around maybe Agile and Scrum, a bunch of these things kind of like change very frequently. So you might plan something in the beginning and it will change, because also like the Agile processes expect the requirements to change, like the ability to change the requirements as you're building something, and as requirements change, also the testing needs might change as well. So kind of like maintaining a document like this very rigorously throughout the project's lifecycle might turn out to be very tedious if everything is changing all the time, but some things are still worth to be documented, like environments, etc. And and even with environments, I mean, in some cases, for one release, you might need a certain standard set of environments, and then on the next one, you might need to change it, or you might need to add an environment, or you might not need it. That's why in some cases, people might skip this, having this document. But if you really want to be structured and you want to be defended against the ups and downs of miscommunications, of people expecting something in the beginning and then expecting and telling you that they expected something else at the end, then it's quite key to put something like this together in a formal way and have it approved by the project manager, have it reviewed by the key stakeholders, so that everyone knows what we're on about when we're starting testing. Yeah, so you will see this being missed in some cases, and it should be okay-ish, kind of. So you don't have to stress out, and you should know that it's not going to be your responsibility to put a test plan together. But if for some reason you end up in that situation, like you're the first test person in a new team, yeah, then you know you can just come up, get this template, which I will also link in the description, and just go through these, which are all pretty intuitive to fill out, and then this will guide you through the way. Yeah, and when you start a new career, you just get introduced to the test manager. This would also be a good starting point for a conversation. So you would ask, hey, can I have a look at the test plan for this product? And you read through, and if they don't have it, then just know that it happens, that sometimes people don't have it, and it would be a good point, or maybe a quite a cool kind of first move for you to put together a test plan, helping the test manager to say, hey, like while I'm getting onboarded and learning about this product, I would also like to put together something formal and put something like this together.
Alright, I hope the video was helpful for you guys, especially to understand what test planning is and what a test plan document is. And I promise you that this is going to come very handy for you when you start thinking of applying for new roles and going for interviews, because as I mentioned earlier, this is definitely going to boost your confidence. This is going to make sure that you know that the answers you provide to specific interview questions are also, like, you're going to know where they're sitting in the overall context, and like you will be able to give much more than the person interviewing you is asking for, and it will just make the overall impression much more positive. Stay tuned, and in the next video we're going to start building your CV, and it's going to be quite exciting as we're approaching closer and closer to you starting to apply for your next job in the IT industry.